Oh, yeah. Get out the easel and the beret. It's time for the art, the Brian Campbell experience. As promised, you know it's here. It's ready to deliver. Your boy BC looking at you. Excited to launch my new interview series, 20 questions, separate from the typical fighter interviews. This vehicle is about me identifying people in the combat sports space or beyond that I already find very interesting. And I hope to share with you, the viewer, what makes these people tick, what are their motivations, some inside stories on how they got to be who they are. It's going to be a big mixture of people you know, people you don't know, and people you hope to one day meet. Today's guest, how about Oscar Willis of the Mac Life? I know he can be a polarizing media figure and a wild man. He's also a great hang and a good dude underneath it. He's a little bit more than media these days, considering he took an amateur MMA fight. Now he's got a BKFC fight against fellow journalist Ben the Bane Davis. I get inside the head of Oscar Wilde to talk Wild. How about Wild Oscar Willis to talk about his UK upbringing, how that shaped him to have such a don't give an F attitude today, the evolution of MMA media during his time, his role now as a fighter, and of course, relationships he built with Dan Hooker and a podcast, and so much more. I hope you like what we're doing here. And if you do, or if you just like your boy BC, how about a like? How about a subscribe on the channel? Yes, it does go a long way. Let me know what type of content in the comments you want to see from BC moving forward. Let me know what type of guests you want to see get the 20Q format. And now here it comes, a fast-moving, quick-hitting mixture of the ridiculous, the serious, and the in-between. It's your boy BC going 20 questions with Oscar Willis. Get some of that. Enjoy it. Oh, you're looking at him, the most dangerous man in combat sports media today. And by the way, I mean that on many, many, many different levels. From the Mac Life with love, it's Oscar Willis. Brother, thank you for joining me here.
Thank you very much for having me. I know it's like a bit of an interrogation, but I feel more relaxed than I have in many of my other interrogations. And they were in a much like less comfortable setting too. So we're good here.
Yeah, maybe like your first vasectomy and the time you got pulled over again. But Oscar, 20 questions with you to get to know you a little bit better. One of the more interesting people in this space. It begins right now. You will be bare knuckle boxing fellow MMA journalist / fighter Ben the Bane Davis on October 12th at BKFC Spain. Question number one, the hell is wrong with you, Oscar?
Well, you know, I just kind of thought I need stimulation and I have a very poor impulse control. And I suddenly saw, you know, Conor was involved in BKFC. I was like, hey, that means I can have their phone number and just make a call. And then I did. And you'd be surprised how willing BKFC are to watch very unqualified people hurt each other. So they were all for it. And then I was
no Brendan Schaub. You'd be surprised right there. Staying with this tune, though, you're delightfully off kilter. So this actually does seem to make sense. Am I being insulting or am I right on here?
No, I figure people have become to expect the worst from me, right? So they kind of assume that I would do stuff that's going to shorten my lifespan. They usually would assume that's like in a bathroom somewhere at 3 in, but no, to do it in a ring and actually get paid money for it. I think really I'm really making my parents proud with this, right? They get to see me setting up my financial future by shortening my life. It's really all they could have ever hoped for.
What was the parents' reaction, by the way?
Dude, you want actually a funny story? So we were in Manchester for the UFC fight card, and Tom Aspinall obviously won, and he's a guy I've got a relationship with. He invited my parents over to his house for a barbecue the day after. And he said to my mum, what do you think about your son's bare knuckle fight? So he's the one who broke the news to my mum. I was not going to tell them. And she was obviously appalled. And then Tom kept telling her, like, I think it's a bad idea, Leslie. You know, you're going to let him go through this. But I managed to convince her that, like, Mum, come on, like, I'm getting paid for it. And realistically, what's the worst damage that me and another, you know, media member can really do to each other? And she was never really sold on it. And then eventually I said, if I went to the pub and had a punch up right now, it's no different. And then as soon as I said that, she was fine. She was like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Oh, so, she's like, we've been here before. Oscar.
Yeah, she literally, yeah, she was like, oh, that's every weekend. So that's fine. Yeah. So they were unimpressed, but have grown to accept, I guess.
All right. Question number two. You teased it earlier. Conor McGregor, of course, the fantastic fighter, owner of the Mac Life, your employer, also part owner now of the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. What role did he play in this fight coming together? Meaning, how did this literally happen? Because it was a shock, a delightful shock to so many of us.
Actually, I don't think he played that big a role as you might think. I think when he first, I said I was interested in doing it. I think there's a little bit of skepticism, like, okay. And then, when the announcement was coming out, I didn't want to blindside him, so I let it be known. And he just called me a mad bastard and just was like, oh, you mad bastard. And I think he'll be there. I'm sure he'll be ringside. And I'm kind of excited to get the experience of having him, where he's screaming ringside
Oh,
coaching. I'm kind of
yes.
curious to see how it feels. Probably overwhelming, but I'm curious to see how that feels being the one he's actually coaching. So
I mean,
yeah,
you
he'll
can
be
play
there.
the role of Charlie Ward in a Bellator cage, and
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
also play the role of Mark Goddard. This could be wild, right?
I think at BKFC they kind of just let him do what he wants. He can probably get in the ring if he wants, give me a corner in the middle of the round. I'm sure the rules don't really apply as much here. So yeah, but it'll be wild. But yeah, he was I think pleasantly surprised that I went through with it.
All right. Well, you, of course, are well known in combat sports circles as the face and content manager of the aforementioned Mac Life. So, how would you describe the state of MMA media at this moment? Question number 4 here, Oscar.
Oh, the media. I mean, pretty trash, right? I think it's pretty. I don't want to be like negative. I'm part of it. I'm probably part of the reason it's trash as well. But I think the state of the whole thing is kind of wild, right? The way the UFC have turned, and it makes sense for them, right? They've turned their schedule into a well-oiled machine. And so the media days that used to be one-on-ones are now press conferences, which means everyone's uploading the same content, which means there's eventually certain channels are just going to fall by the wayside because they're not going to be able to keep up with, getting the views and so on. And then combine that with the fact the UFC has grown since COVID, particularly. You've got more and more partners paying more and more money to get more and more access, which means that independent media such as myself, Fighting Junkie, the cherry that we get to bite from is getting smaller and smaller each event. Now you've got like they get the fighters go and do about 20 interviews on the Tuesday before we get to see them on the Wednesday, which means by the time we get hold of them, everyone's kind of seen what they have to say about the fight. I kind of not really bitching and moaning about it. If I was being paid a lot of money, I would give those people preference too. My fear, in fact, is actually that one day we get to a point where, say, like the TV rights deal, Netflix come along and give them $10 billion. If I was Netflix and I was paying $10 billion, I would be like, well, you're not letting any YouTube channels in to film our press conference anymore. This is ours. And that's where I'm really concerned that we're heading. But at the moment, I'd say the state of play is pretty poor because the system means there's not really time or opportunity for creativity. So everyone's just kind of asking the same stuff, just trying to get through to the next weekend.
That's a fair question. That's a fair answer. And I think a lot of times, maybe unfairly, us traditional media members, or maybe me, working for CBS Sports, part of the old guard, we sometimes can throw darts at the Johnny come latelys who are characters who arrive on the scene and are sort of doing that. But I think an even bigger story than that, if we're talking about the state of MMA media and combat sports media, maybe even you can extend that across all of sports, is the voice now that current athletes have with their own YouTube channels and stuff. How much do you think that has affected the need for traditional media to show up at these events?
Well, you hit a great point, right? Like I think every top tier athlete and some of the not top tier athletes have their own YouTube channel, right? That they get to set the narrative on, they get to enjoy it. And honestly, like, man, stand around Daniel Cormier for 5 minutes. He's bringing his YouTube channel up, right? They get a real buzz off it. They get to see something grow and they get a creative, excitement from it. So it used to be that we were looking, the Mac Life was, for example, we're looking at like, oh, let's approach fighters and offer like, hey, we'll give you a certain amount of money and then we'll come in and film a documentary of your camp and we'll get to use it, and sort of a deal like that, right? They've all doing it themselves. There's no need for people to come in and do that anymore, right? And I would like to say the Mac Life was one of the first channels that did that with Conor back in the day for the Floyd fight. We sort of showed some access to that. And I wish I could even say I was really involved in that creative decision, but I wasn't. But yeah, I think it's like, you mentioned the characters. It's kind of required, right? Like you got, there are characters in the media that do their shtick and that helps them stand out. And then I think, as you say, if I'm Tom Aspinall or Alexander Volkanovski or Israel Adesanya, why would I give? It's like your intellectual property, right? Why am I just giving it away for free? If I can make money off my own interview, why would I not do that? I mean, I'm if any of you are watching, don't do that. Please give me the
Yeah.
interview. But otherwise, yeah, it makes sense to me for them to
I mean,
just
some
do
of
it
the
themselves.
fighters often say, if I can make money off of showing my butthole, why wouldn't I do that on OnlyFans?
And some
And
of them do. Some
yeah,
of them do that. If you know where to look.
yeah, I'm sure your credit card statements are all over the place here, Mr. Oscar. Continuing down here to number 5, compare and contrast with me, because as much as you are a professional journalist, you're out showing up at all the biggest events. You've got this business relationship with Conor McGregor, yet I always see you hanging out, filming, partying with Craig Jones, who is maybe the most hilarious man on the planet. Compare and contrast when the cameras are off. What is it like to hang out with both men?
Well, first of all, I want to shout out Craig. He actually gave me this Kamala Harris t-shirt.
Oh,
So
wow.
I just wanted to rep that today, just let him know I was giving him a tap. Hanging out with Craig is, you know, I'll put it like this. I saw a comment on the jiu-jitsu Reddit the other day where they're like, dude, if Craig was really doing all these drugs, he wouldn't be able to function as a person. There's no way he could pull off what he's doing if, you know, he was really this person. He's really that person. I've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes. So it's hanging out with him is, I mean, literally probably worse for you than having a bare knuckle fight. I can tell you that. And actually, Craig has taken me to a nightclub and sent me from the club to a flight. I flew from Vegas to Miami straight from the club, and they couldn't wake me up in Miami. They stretched me off the plane thinking that I was in a coma. So that's what Craig Jones is like. And the Conor is obviously like a bit more of a professional relationship. I don't really like, I haven't hung out with him socially like that. We did hang out in Marbella. And I can only speak to how he's always been really cool with me, man. He's really cool.
That's
and
great.
actually, one of the things I really like about hanging with Conor, I've got to be in the Black Forge a few times, is seeing tourists come in and seeing him and sort of watching their brain like completely malfunction, like, oh my God, he's actually here. And then he goes around and does the landlord thing, like goes around, how's your food? Is there anything else you need? Can I get your water? It's just fantastic to watch that. So that's like a real buzz for me when I hang out with Conor. But
You know,
yeah.
the thing is, normally that part happens if you think like the movie Rocky Balboa, where Rocky's character is old, he's got the restaurant, he's got the pictures on the wall. It's sort of like when they're past it, right? When they're just living in their own memory. He's like, no, I'm still an active, the biggest, you know, biggest combat sports star in the world. But hey, how's your giblets over there? All right?
Have you tried the steak? Can I recommend the steak? Get her a steak. And then I was also like, some kid was like, how do you know if he's in there? I was like, well, there's not a lot of Rolls Royces in that area of Dublin. So if there's one parked out the front, you can probably guess he's coming in. Yeah. So
That's fantastic.
It's cool, though.
Speaking of partying, I think the statute of limitations might be close to expiring now from your amateur MMA debut in 2022, when you took a decision from Jeremiah Benavidez at Tough Enough Fight for Our Troops 11 in Las Vegas. I'm laughing at the name, but obviously I have a ton of respect for the balls that you had. EKC Leiden, another MMA journalist, did the same thing. So speaking of toxicology, what would the test results show was in your system that night?
Just a lot of balls, brother. Testosterone and, you know, heart.
I don't believe you at all.
Listen, it had been a long 6-week camp. I actually trained 20 weeks, but we cut it off at 6 weeks. Yeah, I don't think it took long for my system to be flooded. I'll tell you that. In fact, I got a whiskey off the guy in the front row as I was walking to the back, and the doctor said, can you wait a second? And I went, I'm sorry, no. And then I had to just like say, we'll leave it there on terms of what exactly got in the system, but I will just let you know there was a copious amount. And in fact, some would say too much. To go from nothing to 100 miles an hour that quick was probably not good for me, especially with a concussion. I think I was just talking a lot of nonsense to a lot of people that night, but I made up for lost time, put it that way.
You're a wild man, and I say that with so much love. Question number 7 here. We always talk about this when we interview fighters. I'm sure you've asked it before. We are in love with the romanticism of the walk to the cage. You're a regular man, maybe a guy with more bar fights than most, but a regular man. How nerve-wracking was the final moments in the locker room and the walk to the cage for that amateur debut?
You know what was really crazy about that was, and it was something I was not expecting at all, was I wasn't nervous at all. I just felt like really sort of, sounds a bit like wanky, but I was just really ready. I was like, right, let's just do this. Like, I've been training for ages, like the fight's here, let's just do it. And I didn't feel nervous at all. And then a guy who had fought loads of times before in the amateur scene and that level, like regional scene, he said, he gave me good advice. He's like, just pretend you're enjoying it even if you're not. He's like, and then you'll sort of trick yourself. So when my music came on, I came out like singing and dancing. Like, I was like, fuck, I'll pretend I'm having a good time even if I'm terrified. And it really did help. I just kind of wasn't nervous at all. Now, what scares me is that might have been a complete fluke. And then this time I'm going to go and be shitting my pants. So I'm a bit like, oh, did I trick myself into thinking it's going to be good each time? But yeah, that particular night, I wasn't that nervous at all. It was only like, because I was also next to the guy. Like, I was next to the guy who was fighting. We were like both waiting to walk out, and I was looking at him like trying to be all tough and stuff. And then I thought, this is ridiculous. So then I was just like, have a good one. And right before we walked out, the people from the previous fight came in. They had to put an oxygen mask on him, and I literally saw that, and I turned to Jose Youngs, who was with me, and I said, I didn't really need to see that right now. Like right before I go out, I didn't need to see that. But it kind of I just made fun of the whole situation. Just tried to keep it light because
I mean,
otherwise I
were
think you
you
freak yourself out.
like you trained seriously? I assume you
Yeah.
did this. You know, it wasn't like you made this decision while you were drunk in the night, and the fight was the next day. So was there a transition between kind of cosplaying in the beginning as pro fighter, as you know, as a fighter, and then entering survival mode? Because I'm sure that stamina has to start hitting you when you're pouring out your gas tank. I mean, at some point, were you fighting for your life in there at any point, or was it still a controlled sort of martial arts event?
Oh no. There was like I was really surprised. I said to someone, I was like, oh, I can't believe I didn't have an adrenaline dump. He was like, you absolutely did. And I was really sort of surprised at how conscious I was of what was happening. Like it wasn't a consciousness of, okay, I'm going to throw a 1-2 and slip the counter. It was more like wow, that really hurt when he just hit me with that punch. That sucked. And then I was thinking like, damn, he's going to knock me out in the first round. Like, I can't believe it. Like there's a lot of thoughts like that. And I remember in the third round, I had him against the cage, and I looked at my coach, and my coach went 1 minute. And I was like, 1 minute? Like, I couldn't believe there was so much time left. I was so tired. So yeah, the fatigue was real, but you sort of, for me personally, I just sort of was like, well, I'm very tired, but I may as well just keep going, and then whatever happens, happens. But yes, there was a moment where it went from like as you say, you're walking in there, it's all a bit silly, and then the moment you get hit, you're like, oh fuck, that feels a lot different than sparring, you know? And then you're sort of like actually fighting.
Sure, it feels a lot different than when you're 8 Guinnesses in and you catch a right hand in a pub. And speaking of that, as much as you're willing to share, how many street fights would you say you've been in, and what percentage of them have you won outside the cage? Whether we're talking about schoolyard, bar, street
uh
corner, whatever.
Yeah, well, certainly like not for years and years now, like, but when I think it's not unfair to say that like culturally in the UK, like having a punch up at a pub's pretty common. And I'd say from like 18 to 21, there was one every other weekend. I'm not saying I was any good at them. I think I'd say the win rate, well, actually, the win rate was probably about 80%. But then again, sometimes the odds were pretty uneven. So you never know. But yeah, there was a few. I remember like, yeah, there was a few. But yeah, it was good times. It never, I think nowadays, and this sounds like I'm like a real old guy being nostalgic, but nowadays I think there's more of a concern of like knife crime and stuff like that. So I don't know how it would be now. I think you'd be a bit more concerned about like having a dig in the mouth or something. But back then I remember there was a night at a club. It was actually after David Haye won the world title, and then everyone decided they were a boxer at that night. But you went to a club, and like there's a big group fight between my friends and a group of guys, and we all got kicked out, and some police came by, and the police said, right, you guys pick one, and the winners get to go back inside. And like it was a very like casual sort of
Oh,
thing. They
wow.
didn't pick me. We picked a guy called Shane. He won. He was much tougher than I was. But yeah, it was much more casual. So it did happen. And I wouldn't say they were like death-defying street fights. It was usually just like, you know, I got punched in the head, someone else got punched in the head, and then everyone was like, fucking leave it, yeah, leave it. And it just sort of moved on.
And then before you know it, you're buying the guy a beer. I've seen it a million times.
Yeah,
All right. Speaking of your fight with Ben Davis, let's talk about this from a sporting sense at BKFC Spain. What will your preparation and training camp actually look like for this fight?
Well, so I'm training Extreme Couture, and there's a few guys in there who've had bare knuckle fights already. So I'm just sort of learning at the moment. Like, it's a weird thing, right, doing bare knuckle, because some guys say, right, okay, you need to punch wood for 20 minutes a day, and you need to like rub your hands in sand and like dead your knuckles. And it's sort of, I can't quite get over my very middle class media background and being like, I'm not punching fucking wood. Like, I'm just not going to do that. I think my strategy of don't think about it, it'll be fine is where I'm going to operate. But yeah, I'm going to like do a ton of sparring, boxing sparring, and try and do it with little gloves to try and sort of replicate the distance. And then I think it's from every time I've seen bare knuckle, it's basically a sprint. It's 2-minute rounds, and it's like putting two people in the blender and turning the on button. So I think basically you just need to do cardio and just like try and get your ability to just sprint and recover quickly. So hill sprints, lots of that I hate, but you know, that seems to be the vibe. Just get the cardio up.
How do you feel you match up with Ben, who has taken, I believe, a karate combat fight? He seems to be as equal in his motive. You know, he wants to be a broadcaster. He's doing great work, but he also wants to do crazy shit. So how do you think this fight breaks down?
Yeah, it's funny. Everyone keeps calling me like the wild guy and stuff, but Ben said yes as well. I think Ben deserves some credit. And Ben's done like boxing. He told me when he took the boxing fight, he's like, "Oh, I'm boxing Anderson Silva's son." I was like, "I wouldn't fucking do that. That's really dumb." So he did that. He did a karate combat fight most recently. I think he did Indian leg wrestling in Thailand. He's done jiu-jitsu. So the guy's a bit of a covers all of his bases, you know, many in all aspects of his life. But I think he's good, he's tough. I watched his karate combat fight and he just threw a lot of kicks, so I don't know what I can take out of it. But I think he's actually a sneakily like decent boxer. When you watch his Misfits fights against Anderson's son, like he had good head movement, which isn't something you'd expect from a really low level guy. So yeah, I think it'll be a very fun first 2 minutes, and then watching two very out of shape, adrenaline dumped, gassed guys surviving 4 minutes is how I think it's going to
It's going
go.
to be glorious. It's going to be like
Yeah.
that section of the gas station I love, you know, where the
Yes.
meat is
Yeah.
rolling on those rollers and you're trying to guess
Yeah.
what's inside of it, and then you just go for it. Speaking of, you have appeared to master, Oscar, the fine art of not giving a fuck. I don't know if that's just your culture, but how did you get there?
Oh yeah, that's cultural. That's if the people you love the most say the meanest things to you, there's not really a lot of stuff you can take from strangers, you know? My mother like shits on me every day. So it's like when you're getting text messages being like, you really are an idiot. It's just like, you know, from the people you want the most respect from. So culturally, yeah, I think there's a lot of like banter. And that's what made Conor so special, right? On his come up, like the Irish have the crazy banter as well. So I think culturally there's that. And I think also like I was a pretty like laughable figure in high school. I was a bit of the class clown and everything. So there came a point where as long as I get the laugh, I don't really care where it comes from. I don't really care if you're laughing at me or with me. It's like I still got the laugh. So yeah, I just never took myself too seriously. So it's hard to take anything people say about me too seriously either.
When you look back, and what is your hometown, by the way, Oscar, so I know?
Canterbury in southeast of London, Canterbury in the UK.
All right, all right.
Very
That's a
fancy.
sounds like a proper dirtbag dwelling right there. I'm into that. Uh, what did you expect to become when you're graduating high school and you look at where you are today? If you were able to see a vision of that, what would your response have been? Because you kind of like you've made it. You're doing cool shit. You're probably making a good living. You're living in the States. I mean, it's
Yeah.
decent, right?
Well, when I graduated high school, they asked me to leave, and I wasn't allowed to go back for like the further exams. So it wasn't a positive ending to our relationship. They made me go, and the principal said I was the worst people he'd ever dealt with in 25 years. So that was my badge of honor there. And then I was in construction for 3 years, and then it was like Conor started showing up, MMA started getting bigger over there. And then I went to the American Embassy to apply for a visa and said I wanted to be an MMA journalist because English was the only subject at school I was any good at. So I could write a little bit. And then I kind of just sort of failed upwards and it just sort of worked out. And it's, yeah, even if there's like a really shitty day at work or something like that, I'm always good about being conscious of like, man, I'm in Las Vegas and I'm not on a building site. Life's pretty good, you know, and I'm pretty good at like talking myself out like, this is shit. The fucking Apex sucks. It's like, well, you know, it's like I can sort of fathom that I've really pulled it off despite not really knowing how. So that's cool. That's a cool thing that I really do wish my teachers could see me. That'd be an amusing little turnaround because they thought I was going to be a drug addict dead guy.
And everything about their prediction is true except for the dead part.
Yeah,
But
I'm
you know,
still
you gotta
breathing
love
at
that.
least.
No, but similarly, to pull some wisdom from your humor there, I remember being 26. I'd got out of journalism. I was a college dropout. I was turning my life around, and I remember I had a job doing inventory counting at grocery stores. I was laying on the floor counting tampon packages in my hometown as like other parents of people I went to school with are walking by
Yeah.
and being like, "Oh, hey, you're down there. Hey." And I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
thinking, "Yep, I'm down here and I'd never want to feel this way again." So, you know, we've been there, Oscar.
Yeah,
You
well,
know?
that's even I remember the moment I was on a roof in London and it was raining and we were trying to shove this fucking it's called a flute like down a chimney. And it was me and my dumbass friend and we like got it the wrong way round. It was just like we were just stoked and I just turned to him. I said, "Where's Sunny?" And he went, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Where in the world is Sunny?" And he said, "Florida." I was like, "I'm fucking being in Florida next year." And I just made it happen. And I've never shown any conviction like that before, but it, like you said, it's amazing what a bit of shame and the realization of like, oh, I'm going to be here in 30 years if I don't do something right now can really motivate.
Never underestimate what shame and rock bottom can do to motivate you and get you out of your circumstance. You're constantly on the front lines now of combat sports journalism, traveling on the regular. How do you specifically navigate the task of not pissing off UFC CEO Dana White when like your job inevitably puts you in situations to ask questions that will set him off?
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of come to the realization that like with people, characters as intense as Dana, like, you know, there's multiple of them, right? Like I'm sure John Jones, people like really people like that. If you're around them for long enough, they will get annoyed at you at some point. So you kind of have to accept that. And then I think Dana and I have always done really well because when I've asked him a shit stirry question, I will sit there with a shit eating grin staring at it. Like while he's getting angry, I'll just be like that. So he knows I'm doing it because I find it funny to piss him off. And I think that has sort of helped me out. Like he kind of appreciates the cheeky vibe of it. But I also think and this isn't necessarily good journalism or whatever, but it's also sometimes you know like what's going on behind the scenes. So you know, like if I ask this question in particular, like I know it's going to piss him off, and really the return I'm going to get on that is not very good. So you make the calculation in your head of like, right, if me mentioning like, hey, why hasn't this person signed for this fight yet? That seems to be the fight you want to do, and you know there's drama backstage about it. Like realistically, does the fans gain from him being like, I don't know, we'll see? Not really. And do I gain from him being like, this motherfucker? You know, so you make the calculation in your head, and sometimes like, you know, if I get him to shit on Bob Arum, I'll take that roll of the dice every single time. Or Oscar De La Hoya, I can't resist. It's too funny. But if it's like about some behind the scenes stuff that I know is not really going to go anywhere, then I'll just leave it.
All right. Well, it's a badge of honor if Bob eventually looks at you and goes, "You little prick."
Yeah, that was the best day ever. That Coppinger got it in the neck.
Where he deserves it there by Cop.
Right. And he hides it with his turtleneck so well, but Bob got that.
And the Lex Luthor haircut, even though he's got a full head of there, I think. But let's talk about your philosophy on what you do interviewing. It's one thing to be offering questions in a scrum or at a press conference, but we all know the true craft of this is in the one-on-one setting. What is your philosophy and what are you trying to accomplish when it comes to your style of one-on-one interviewing?
Casual. Like I try and sometimes to its detriment. Sometimes I'll be too casual and too chummy, and then I'll watch it back and be like, "Ugh, you fucking kiss ass," you know. So there's like times where I'll miss the mark myself for sure. But I think if I wanted to watch like a really good like one-on-one where like all the questions are answered in depth and the interviewer won't let them go and won't let a question go unanswered, then I would just tune in to watch Ariel. And if I tried to do the same thing, then people are going to be watching like a poor imitation of Ariel. So who wants to watch that? So where I would do better is I think I'm more like a guy that I could sit and talk nonsense with you over a beer and still kind of touch on the fight, touch on other stuff, and sort of just have like a bit of a wild chat that can sort of still get to where we need to go. So I'd like to sort of see myself almost in the middle of like an Ariel and then like some of the character journalists that we mentioned earlier. I think there's like a healthy middle ground that I try and operate on. Sometimes I go too far one way, too far the other. But essentially, I kind of always think like we're not talking about presidential tax returns here. You know, we're talking about a guy fucking smacking you in the face. And I think it should always be treated with a little bit of tongue in cheek and a little bit of like, let's not act like we're saving the fucking world here. Do you know what I mean? Like me and Dan Hooker aren't sitting there like working out how to solve the Gaza Strip. We're sitting there talking about him getting in a fist fight. So I think you need to never take it more seriously than it should be. And I think that's the sort of the healthy attitude towards fighting. I think if you take it too seriously, then you're just like what are we doing? You know, who the fuck's enjoying
Oscar, I figured that out really early. And I figured it out at ESPN. And even though I've been able to hold some high-level corporate jobs, it's entertainment, dude. You know, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it can be life or death in the fighting surface, especially in boxing, unfortunately. But outside of that, the ridiculous sports we cover with ridiculous people. It should be a carnival to a certain degree. That was always my feeling on it.
And I've always found the disconnect between the media who cover the sport and the attitude of the public, to the disconnect between those to be so funny to me. I don't know if it's the same in any other sport where like basically I better watch that, but like the majority of fans are a conservative leaning, Trump loving, gun hogging fan base. And the majority of the media that cover this are like super lefty pro wrestling nerdy guys from art school. And it's just wild to see such a vast disconnect. And then so sometimes you see like the media justifiably so like harking on a topic. I'll be like, this is outrageous, this is disgusting, stuff like that. Like, no one gives a fuck. No one gives a fuck, realistically. Like, so the antitrust thing is obviously a massive story. Not for the fans. The fans don't give a fuck. And half the fighters don't care. But it's just so funny to see like the media have to push that narrative to make people realize like this is a big deal, because otherwise no one would be talking about it. It's just crazy, the disconnect.
It really is. We all have our favorites, the people that we love interviewing because it's easy or they give you such gold. I was always Daniel Cormier in the UFC, Timothy Bradley in boxing because he's so honest. I love Rolly Romero today because he's a comedic genius underneath all that. Who is the best interview for you in combat sports today and why?
Daniel Cormier is a great shout. Like I could listen to that guy talk about fighting for an hour. Like that guy's so interesting. I think obviously I've formed relationships with a few guys now, so the interviews are more just catch up with friends. Obviously, like me and Dan gel very well. Before and after. Craig is obviously a good interview. Even though sometimes the Craig interviews are kind of weird because it's basically like a rush to the joke and there's no actual interview. So sometimes I watch an interview and be like, dude, we didn't talk about anything in that. I've always thought that, especially in a one-on-one setting, Israel Adesanya is like a really underrated interview. I think people have a really weird attitude towards Israel because of the fact he doesn't really suffer fools from fans and stuff like that. Like he's confident in who he is, but I think he's very, very insightful and switched on, and in a way a lot of other fighters aren't. Obviously Conor is a gold mine. Like Conor can still just pull it out whenever he wants. I've always thought Aspen was fun too, but yeah, like I know I'm sort of rambling a lot, but the guys that are just a little bit introspective, I think, are always the ones I find the most. The ones who have an understanding, like we just said, of like what they're doing, and there's a little bit of self-deprecation involved. Like those are the guys I find most fun to deal with.
Yeah, I think in general, and this is true in anyone you're interviewing, obviously sometimes it's easier in combat sports because people are more real, but I think in general, people have programmed answers, especially when they're in a job like these fighters are, where typically they're doing a big fight week, 20, 30, I don't know how many interviews they're doing. They all have a pre-programmed answer. The key is getting them off that program. But you mentioned Adesanya, we talked about DC. These are guys who I feel cut right to the truth of what they're really feeling. And that's a revelation in this job when it's so many of how was training camp, that kind of BS across the board. So
that's also what I don't understand is like why people react so badly to like Israel. Like, okay, so he's saying like, I mean, fuck, the race thing with Dricus was obviously a minefield, but I would rather have a guy, even if I disagreed or thought what he was saying was silly, if I could feel that it was at least coming from 100% earnest place, that's far more interesting to me than a guy who's just saying what he thinks I want to hear, or is saying like some pre-programmed answer. I'd rather hear like, oh, thank God you're able to at least articulate like how you're feeling about this situation. Kamaru was always very good at that too, like just like being it. And Francis, in fact, since we're on the Three Kings, like Francis is like, for someone who's speaking his like fourth language and is like articulating it a point and being insightful and philosophical better than I could ever be. That's really crazy. But yeah, it's like, as long as you're like, even John Jones, right? John Jones says a lot of weird shit, but I know he means it and I know he believes it. So then it's like fun to listen to and engage with.
Indeed, it's fun to pick apart afterwards too and try to figure out what he was really saying or what have you. What fight in your fandom do you think is most responsible for the combat sports fan you are today, and or the combat sports journalist you are today?
It was funny, right? So I was a pro wrestling fan, even though I just shit on those people about 10 minutes ago. But I was a pro wrestling fan. So when Brock Lesnar started doing MMA, I would watch his fights. But that, that was all it was really. And then I was a guy, someone showed me Bonner versus Griffin. And that was then from that day on, I'd pick a guy's name like Rampage Jackson, who I'd sort of heard before, watch every fight. Then during those fights, I'd find someone else, watch every fight. And it was that fight that captured me. And then I was just lost. Then my mother really was like, so all you do is just watch men hurt each other? Where did I go wrong? But yeah, it was the Bonner Griffin one. Even though I watched it after it had aired, maybe by a few years, that one was the one I was like, oh, fuck, what's not to love here?
Really, the gateway drug for so many of us. Bonner Griffin one saved the UFC. I really still believe that to be true in so many ways. You've relocated to Las Vegas now, where you're on the scene for every fight that matters. Even though I've established you as a man who I believe enjoys the seedy sides of life, what is the seediest part about living in Las Vegas where maybe even you are like, I got to go home and wash that off a little
It's usually coming home with me. Yeah, no, it's yeah, man. Like Vegas is a funny one in that it can be as seedy as you want it to be. And luckily I've figured out quite a lovely little route of bars that there's no door on the toilet cubicle and stuff like that. Like those are the one, like there's graffiti everywhere. Those are the places I like to go. This is much more concerning for me to air than the fight stories. But yes, the seedy part of Las Vegas is real. I'll tell you a story that I've never said publicly, but
bit.
I was at a strip club. And I don't really go to strip clubs often, but I was at a strip club with some people we've named previously in this chat as well.
Including
And
Floyd Mayweather? Was it
yeah,
Girl
yeah,
Collection?
not quite. No, it was Sapphires, actually, lovely place. And I went up to the private room with the stripper, and in there they had a TV connected to YouTube to play music. And after 10 minutes, she was dancing. She was like, right, you put something on. And I was so fucked up. I put on my MMA fight, made her stop dancing and watch it. And like, dude, I paid her a significant amount of money to do that. And then I left and they're like, oh, what happened? I was like, oh, I showed her my fight. And there was just collective like, what? And then I realized like, oh, that's the weirdest, most insane thing I've ever done. So yeah.
What was her reaction? Because we've all tried my pickup fake line was always like, oh, I'm a reliever on a AA team. I'm a pitcher here. You know what? You're like, no, I'm a fighter. Here's my video.
I think she first of all was probably like, this is the easiest money I've ever made. And then secondly, I think she was a bit confused when I was like, no, sit down. And then like was like, right, so here I wanted to throw a left hook, but I came but like I think she was just very confused.
She's like, honest. You came already? No, came with the left hook. Got it. All right.
So this is the finish right here. And I'm not talking about in the ring. Yeah. No, it was she was confused.
Question 17. We are still numbering these on the way there, on the way to 20. Regardless of obstacles, if Dana White appointed you matchmaker of the day tomorrow, what's the one fight that scratches your itch as a fight fan that you would book? It could be one we're talking about. It could be one that's hard to make. But of all the able-bodied MMA fighters on this planet, what's the one fight the UFC can do that would get you, just fired the hell up?
I mean, for a moment, it was John and Francis,
sure.
Right? I just sort of thought, man, like, they have these MSG shows, and sometimes it feels like the MSG thing's overplayed. But if you had John Jones versus Francis Ngannou at Madison Square Garden, it just feels like, fuck, this is a monumental moment. Now Francis is gone. Tom is like sort of shone up, and now that seems to be the fight that like everyone's kind of going a bit crazy about. But if they do end up fighting, this has been the best build up that you could have had for that fight. John acting like he's too superior, Dana doing God knows what with John. Like, if that fight happens, that'll be the one that I'm like, wow, this is exciting. This is a real clash of eras. This is John either dies in 2 minutes or he proves himself to be the unstoppable genius goat we've all suspected him to be. Like, that one really scratches my itch. That's the one that comes to mind the first.
I got to give credit to Aspinall. I never thought he could, especially with that year off due to the serious injury, I never thought he could evolve so quickly that it's almost made the need as a fan/journalist to argue publicly for the UFC to make Francis versus John. It kind of removes that need, because I think Tom versus John really scratches similar levels of itches at this point.
Yeah, I actually just saw an interesting stat before I joined you on this call that you saw Dana White arguing with Ioli last week about John Jones. You could have watched 5 Tom Aspinall fights in the length Dana White defended John Jones. Like, I worked out the time. It's pretty good.
Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. But if they do that, in my opinion, you got to go Allegiant Stadium, AT&T Stadium in Texas, or Anthony Joshua style Wembley Stadium. Yeah. Right? Like, if you're going to do a heavyweights sell differently. If you're going to do a generational heavyweight summit, it's like, hey, UFC, get in the stadium already. Okay. Enough of the sphere, bro. Get in the stadium already. Right.
See, I've been wanting the Wembley thing forever, right? Because obviously I have an interest in that, being from the UK. But part of me thinks John Jones is the sort of guy, he'd get a little buzz off like, oh, I'm going to go to your home country and kill you in your biggest stadium.
And take your fans.
Yeah, like everything. Like, that's, to me, that, I mean, getting goosebumps thinking about it, but that to me is like a real John Jones thing. And like, I watched Tyson Fury Dillian White at Wembley, and the experience did suck. I mean, it was very funny watching the traveling community do drugs quite so publicly. That was very funny to me. But the experience to watch it was not great. But I think every so often you have to sacrifice that for a moment in history that you can look back on, right? Like, so yeah, okay, the arena experience is so much better. Like, it's like they're sacrificing $20 million to put on the Spear Show. You're doing that so you have a moment that you can point back to whenever you do like these retrospective looks. I think if you did John Jones, Tom Aspinall in Wembley or even at Raiders Stadium, like, they need to fucking do that eventually. It's worth it to sacrifice. Like, okay, so the ticket payer didn't have a great time, but we can have this on a B-roll for the next 10 years. I think it's worth doing.
But I think the ticket buyers know that. I really believe they know they're paying for the cultural experience of being there. People still talk about the energy in the building when GSP fought Carlos Condit in the Dome in Toronto. They still, Brett Okamoto still talks about being in Marvel Stadium when Rousey got head kicked by Holm. You know what I mean? There's just like this moment of the humanity. I hope they do it. Let's keep this going here to close it out. We mentioned earlier your relationship with UFC lightweight Dan Hooker. You guys pod together. It gets wild. We drink some cold ones. What is it about Dan that you two are able to get on literally like brothers?
Yeah, I think it happened really quick as well. But I think basically self-sabotaging idiots can recognize each other from afar. And I think we had exactly, but you smell your own kind. I think, yeah, I did. Honestly, like, I think we had maybe 2 conversations and then he was stuck in Vegas. I was like, hey, do you want to do this podcast in a pub? I think after about 10 minutes, we knew, like, okay, like, we get on, you know, it was just like a vibe. And then Dan's a really interesting guy, man. Like, Dan is, he's like, he can be like a very stoic person. Like, there are times where, like, even after like 2 years, you're like, does this guy even like me? Am I annoying this person? But when it really matters, like, he'll step in front of someone who's trying to attack you, for instance, maybe at a recent UFC event, and stop that from happening. You know, like, he's a very big brotherly sort of figure. And he's just cool. But yes, in terms of like why I knew that, why we got on so well, I think it was just a case of like, oh, you're an idiot. I'm an idiot too. We both know we're idiots. Let's be idiots.
I felt the same energy on Morning Combat. We had Michael Chiesa on the Room Service Diaries couch. I'm like, you know, we come from the similar.
See, Chiesa's a funny one. People wouldn't have him down for that. But damn, you talk to Chiesa for 5 minutes, you realize like,
proper dirtbag here as well. In every possible way. All right, 2 more for you. 19. What is the best and worst cities to travel to cover fights? It could be based on arena, the distance, the people, whatever.
I mean, I hate LA, to be honest. I know that sounds like a real,
my favorite city. Come on, Oscar.
Dude,
I mean, it sucks. It sucks bad, but I love it.
Do you know how many times I've had to delete a tweet saying I want to blow up LAX? Like, I've had to like stop myself because it's just so bad. No, LA is not too bad. It's the traffic getting around's a bitch. I'm trying to think, like, in terms of I mean, I've been going to Saudi Arabia a lot. It's great. Love it there. They watch everything you do, so I don't want to, you know. But I would say that Riyadh is still growing and maybe there's not a lot to do there right now. And also in terms of my own behavioral choices, there's not a lot I get out of it.
How have they not jailed you yet? Can we just, everyone's thinking it, right? And they're watching this.
The first time we went to Riyadh, I was making comments in a cab about their road system over there. And the guy was recording me on his phone. And I was been there for about 2 hours. And my friend Ray was like, yeah, he's recording you. I was like, I knew this would happen. But yeah, no, so those 2 places stand out as worse than the best. The best is always like a fight night on the road. Like, it's like where it's not a big pay-per-view, so the pressure's kind of off. But like San Diego fight night, you can't beat it, right? It's a low work week, and the city itself is super cool. I'm begging them to go to New Orleans. Like, I just need to go back. But those places are always like a chill week in a cool spot. Those are the ones I like to go.
And have you gotten on well with Turkey Al-Sheikh up to this point?
Haven't met Big Turkey yet, personally, not cross paths, but I'd look forward to it. I mean, I remember I was like, how much can I say? I know that at a recent boxing event, he gave a few journalists some pens. I was hoping I'd maybe get a pen at Saudi in the UFC Saudi, but I was yet to receive it. Maybe it's in the post.
Right. Yeah.
But he's doing good. He's like a man.
Pen and it's greater than a bone saw where I come from. So I'm in on that. Finally, number 20 here, Oscar. Okay, we've established that you're a crazy wild man, but I want to know how wild. What would it take if you defeat Ben the Bane Davis on October 12th in Spain, BKFC? What would it take for you to make your power slap debut?
Oh, less than you might think. I don't know. It depends who it was against. Mark Ramundi. I was power slap Mark. Nah, joking. I love that. I don't. But see, at that point, like the bare knuckle thing, right? Dude, by the way, power slap becoming a thing was the best thing to ever happen to bare knuckle, right? Bare knuckle used to be this like disgusting
Oh,
sideshow.
I
Then
know.
power
Yeah.
slap came along. It's like, oh, this is fucking great. That's horrible.
Now you're like, hey, mom, meet this hooker I brought home.
Yeah, yeah,
She's
yeah.
not power slap. You know what
Oh,
I mean? That's
Jesus.
great.
Imagine
Yeah.
what she would say about that. No, I think I don't know, power slap. I feel like if let's say I go into bare knuckle and I get knocked out by Ben, it is what it is. I feel like if you went, lost the coin toss, and then got slapped in the face and knocked out instantly, there's not really a way you can wake up and spin that as a great experience that you learned from. You just feel like an absolute dickhead. So I think if you gave me a few pints, I'd probably give it a go. But at the
Well,
moment, sitting here right now, I'd hopefully say no.
but
Hopefully.
let's create a scenario. You're a few pints deep. You're at a
Yeah.
Las Vegas bar during fight week, and Dylan Dennis walks in and goes, hey, I know you. You're a piece of crap. I saw what you said about me in 2018. And then you say, why don't we settle this in the slap zone, bitch? Then
Yeah.
it's worth it. I think it might be worth it.
He's a lot bigger than me, to be honest.
That is true.
I've been around Dylan a few times, obviously with the Conor connection. He's a lot bigger, but if like, okay, fucking that better Derek guy, I'll fucking power slap him tomorrow.
All
There you
right,
go.
take that better, Derek. There you
I'll
go.
do that for free. That's fine.
Oscar Willis of the Mac Life, thank you for wasting your time with my personal questions to get to know someone I find interesting a little bit better. Anything you want to plug besides the 115-pound roster at this point?
The 25s, 35s, they all deserve love. I think no, just look October 12th. I'm power slapping. Fuck, you got it on my mind now. I'm ready to go. No, October 12th, I'm fighting bare knuckle. It's gonna be 2 minutes, just like everything else in my life. 2 minutes of glory and 4 minutes of apologizing.
Bonus question: is the money good?
It's all right, yeah. It's
Okay,
doing okay. It's all right.
Okay.
Getting paid more than some fucking Dana White Contender Series people.
There you go. Think of how much money you'll have to show the next stripper your bare knuckle.
Nearly as much as I fucking gave her to watch my fight. Anyway.
There you go. Oscar Willis, thank you for your time, brother.
Appreciate it.
Enjoy yourself. All right, let me turn this up.